Thank you. So for those of you who don't know, I have just completed my first year of seminary at One Spirit Interfaith Seminary. I just came back from a week-long intensive. I got back yesterday afternoon. Operative word there being intense. And although I've never been that much of one for ceremony, One Spirit is based upon the fact that there is one great truth, and that it is spoken about by many different masters, and that is understood by many different cultures, and that it is practiced in many different ways, but there is only one truth. There is only one truth, and that one truth is that we are one. So what I wanted to talk about this morning, the surprising thing that's happened for me this year is that, if you noticed as I was singing this song, I started out with, "We're God's children." And then I said the word. I said the C word, Christian. Right? Okay, so here's the deal. I'm taking Jesus back. Christianity has unfortunately been appropriated by people who don't behave in a Christ-like way. And what I've realized is that when I disassociate myself with that and become ashamed of saying I'm a Christian, then I let those people carry the banner for what Christianity is. So it's scary because we live in Texas. Most of my classmates, like probably half of them, are from the metropolitan New York area. Others are in New England. There's several from California, quite a few from Florida, and there are 4 of us from Texas. 3 Houstoners and me. And we like to give the message to the other class that it ain't what y'all experience up there ain't what it's like down here. So I had a great relationship with Jesus when I was 12 years old. I depended on Jesus for everything. I talked to him all day long. When I got sad or when my brothers and sisters wanted to fight with me, I would go out in the backyard and climb a tree and talk to Jesus. And what I know today, that those were both acts of worship. Climbing the tree, I was just as close to God. And talking to Jesus, I was close to God. Because it had meaning for me. And if climbing a tree doesn't do it for you and Jesus doesn't do it for you, that's fine. But I'm going to talk today, for those of you who have kind of thrown, what I did for years is threw out the baby with the bathwater. Threw away Jesus because of the ways that Christianity had hurt me, and I felt betrayed by Christianity. And I want to say to you, how many people kind of felt like that in their lives ever? Yeah. So there's a lot of us. Here's what I would like to say first. Jesus was not a Christian. Never was at any point a Christian. And then we had dear Paul, who came along. It reminds me of an old joke somebody told me a long time ago about that God and Satan were taking a walk, and there was this beautiful golden crystal light with all these colors and reflections, and it was like the most glorious and beautiful thing. And Satan said, "Oh, God, what is that?" And God said, "That, my friend, is religion." And Satan said, "I'll organize it for you." So while Paul said some pretty good things too, and I was just quoting him in that song, "Love is patient, love is kind," Paul said some pretty good things, but Paul also did a lot of harm in his deciding that he would organize this thing called Christianity. When, in my view, Christianity should mean following the ways of the Christ. Whether it happens to be Jesus the Christ or not, following the ways of the Christ. And so I want to dispel a couple of myths that we might be holding on to, because they're big out there, these misconceptions, is that Jesus is kind of wimpy, and that he was kind of a bumpkin. He's from Galilee. His father was a carpenter. He didn't know nothing. And that is proof that it was God only speaking through him. He could never have come up with that stuff because he was just a dumb carpenter guy. The truth is, Jesus came from Galilee, which was on the Silk Road between the Far East and Jerusalem. And he was constantly exposed in his life, just because of where he lived, to this Eastern influence. And if you look at Jesus with new eyes, which I'm going to try to help you do today, he looks a lot more like Buddha than he does like Robert Schuller. He was educated. He knew at least 2 or 3 languages. He knew Hebrew and Aramaic, and he wrote in Hebrew, we know. And he spoke to Pontius Pilate. He spoke to the Romans, so he had to have spoken Latin too. And he commented on some writings that were on some of the temples, and so he knew Latin. He also could read Latin. This was not a dummy. We don't know much about his education, but there are clues. This was not a dummy, and he disappeared. We don't hear anything about him from shortly after he was born until he's 30 years old. Where was he? I'm thinking he was probably hanging out with Buddha. And Jesus was not a moralist. One thing that I have learned, it seems obvious, but I still had to learn it. Every single religious tradition has its own set of practices, and some are very rigorous, and some are not, and some are kind of silly with their rigor, and some are, very helpful and whatever. But every single one gives as a given. The first step is you have to be a moral and ethical person. Now let's get down to our spiritual practice. That's only the beginning, and so many people in Christianity today are stuck on these moral points. And that was not Jesus' message. If you look at the parables, they were not about, let's just all be a little nicer to each other. That's not what they were about. Jesus was a radical. He was a radical, and he was a radical with a radical message, and a message with passion and fire and love, and not like precious kitten love, although there is that. But brave, courageous, passionate, fierce love. That's what he taught, that's what he said in his words, and that's what he did in his life. This is not a milquetoast guy. And as he said himself, his major teaching was, love your neighbor as yourself. And I want to point out something to you. I've always interpreted that as, love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. But that's not really what it says. Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay? If I treat you as a friend, you are my friend. If I treat you as an enemy, you are my enemy. If I treat you as myself, you are myself. Not something separate from me. And I think Jesus came to try to get the apostles and the people that he taught I think he was trying to turn them on their heads. I think he was it was almost like Zen koans he was giving in these parables. He was trying to make them look through a completely different lens, not just raise them up a little higher from where they were, but go, no, it's not that. Look in a different way. And so the apostles kept saying, well, if it's not that, is it this? And he kept going, no, because as soon as you say it's this, then it's not that anymore. If you say it's in the sky, the birds get it first. If you say it's in the earth, then the stones get it before you do. It's not this and it's not that. It's this. It's oneness. And that's what unity teaches. And that's a lot harder concept to do than to just try to get your morals in a line and obey the rules. It's a lot easier to set up some rules and obey them than it is to treat the whole world, every rock and tree and creature, and every person as yourself. And I just want to illustrate that with a couple of the parables. Well, first of all, I want to quote from the Gospel of Thomas. This is Logion 2. And the Gospel of Thomas, if you've never read it, is not history at all. It's just the sayings of Jesus. And some of them are very similar to what you see in the other Gospels, but with a little chili powder on them. And some of them are totally different. But here's one. You've probably heard, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and the door will be opened. I love that scripture. But here's what it says in the Gospel of Thomas. Whoever searches must continue to search until he finds. Don't give up. When he finds, he will be disturbed. Okay? So when you find it, it's not going to have a pretty bow on it. When you find it, it's going to rock your world. And then having been disturbed, he will become astonished. And then in his astonishment, he will reign over everything. So if we approach the world from not the comfortable place, but the place which makes us really have to work a little hard, see it with new ears, and spend our life in astonished mode, then is when we begin to be able to see the kingdom of heaven. It's not here, it's not there, it's not here, it's not there, it's here. And it's only here when we see through the eyes of oneness. So we all know the story of the prodigal son. One of the most famous parables, one of the ones most often quoted. And it's a good parable. It makes you feel good. There were two sons, and one of them was a very impatient kind of guy, and he said to his father, I don't want to wait till you die to get my inheritance and start having fun. Could you just give me the money now? And I'm going to go out and have a good time, and I won't have to stay here and obey your stupid rules. Familiar to any of you parents out there? So he sets out to a far country, and he gambles, and he drinks, and he hangs out with wild women, and he loses all his money, and he ends up on the streets, and the pigs are eating better than him. And he is deeply ashamed. He knows he screwed up, and he says, you know, the servants in my father's house are treated a lot better than I'm being treated out here in the big wide world. I'm going to go back in humility to my father and ask him if I could be a servant. And so he comes, and before the way it's described in the Bible, I'm not reading it because it takes a long time, but before he's even at the home, his father sees him from the distance and comes running out of the house and meets him in the road and throws his arms around him and says, oh, my son who is lost has been found. He has come home. Let's kill the fatted calf. Let's have a big party. Everybody celebrate. This is the best thing that's ever happened. And for those of us who have gone out into the world and made our mistakes and screwed up royally, to know that there is a God who loves us that much and holds no grudges is priceless. But let me ask you this. For those of us who stayed home and did what we were supposed to do the whole time, that doesn't even make any sense. I never got a calf. I never even got a goat for my friends. That's what he says. I never even got a goat. What's up with that? Why are you being so nice to him? And by the way, the money you're spending on him is actually mine because he's already spent his half of the inheritance. So now we're getting into my money. Okay? Did any of you ever question that as a child? That bugged the heck out of me from day one. I thought, well, why am I trying so hard to be good then? Why don't I just go out and spend the money and have a good time, and then I'll just come home when I'm done? And it doesn't make sense. It really kind of doesn't make sense. Let me tell you another parable that will bug you. There was a landowner, and he wanted to hire some people to work his fields for the day. And so at dawn, he met with some workers. He negotiated a price for them to work until sundown, and he put them to work. It was a fair price. Everybody was happy with it. And they toiled all day and all afternoon in the hot sun. And then 1 hour before sundown, these other dudes show up and say, hey, can we work in the fields? And the landowner says, sure, go on out. You know, you only got an hour left, but do what you can. And at the end of the day, when the landowner is handing out the wages, he pays the people who worked the last hour exactly the amount he paid the people who worked the first hour. from the first hour who had worked all day. And they said, "That's not fair," which is my personal favorite phrase. That's not fair. That's not, that's not fair. And the landowner's response is, "What's it to you? You said this was a good price, and I gave you the price we agreed upon. What do you care what I do with this guy? What do you care?" Because what they were saying is, what I got only counts if he gets less. In the seminary where I am, this has driven me crazy all semester. It's bugged the crap out of me, and I finally got it this past week at the intensive. They have not given me one single A the whole time, let alone an A+. They don't grade our papers. They read them intently, and they make a lot of comments about things we might work on and things that, like, oh, good idea or whatever, but no A's. The only way for me to make an A or for that A to count is for someone else to get a B or C. That's the only way my A has meaning. And they just, by God, would not give it to me. So me and one other girl who really do work very hard, and we decided that we were the valedictorian and salutatorian, and we're still negotiating. Because other people brought their dialogue questions in, and they were like this thick, and ours were like a book. That we're just going to give each other A's. But we were joking about that, but I finally got that point. Because when this doesn't make sense, the prodigal, the second son, and the guys that worked all day versus the guys that only worked a little while. In our world, in the world's terms, in the terms of justice, in the terms of scale and balancing things, it doesn't make sense. But if I am both the prodigal son and the son that came home, if there's no difference between us, viewed through the eyes of oneness, when we take duality out and we truly get into oneness, you can't give anything to him that isn't mine. And you can't give anything to me that isn't his also. And that is hard to deal with because our human brains are hardwired for duality. We are hardwired for something very, very different. And what we are called to is something that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel fair. And until we find that place in our souls that can equally rejoice for other people's graces and equally hurt for other people's pains and are equally motivated to do what's right, whether it's affecting us personally or not, then we are still living in that world of duality. And what Jesus came to say is, that's not it. You don't get it. And if you go back and read some of the parables, you'll see more and more that message. What I believe is that message. This is not a namby-pamby guy trying to make you feel comfortable that you're just loved. Yes, you are loved. That's the given, he says. That's the beauty. There's nowhere you can go, and there's no way you can run or hide from God's love. There's no way to do it wrong. But if you want to be fulfilled, if you want to find the kingdom of heaven, which he says is within you and among you, in the Aramaic it kind of means both things, which makes a lot of sense, that it's within us and among us. If we're all the same, then within and among is exactly the same thing. There's no difference. Wow. So the one thing I know that Jesus, for me, was not saying was, go ahead and be complacent and self-congratulatory. You're doing a good enough job. You can stop here. Now, he's also not saying flagellate yourself because you screw up day after day after day. That's a given. We were created this way. We were created in human bodies that screw up, and that's okay, and we're loved. But if we want the kingdom of heaven, then we have to stop looking through the eyes of duality and begin to look through the eyes of oneness. Jesus says in Matthew 10:34, "Do not suppose that I came to bring peace to the world. I have come not to bring peace, but a sword. That doesn't mean Jesus wanted us to make war on the world. The early Christians wanted that to mean, let's kill the Romans and make our religion the big one. Let's convert the Jews and kill the Romans. I don't think that's what Jesus was saying. I think he was saying, if you are not looking through the eyes of oneness, you probably shouldn't feel peaceful inside. What is needed is not more peaceful stuff. What's needed is something to wake you up. You have to slice through that vision of duality to find the oneness. To me, that's what the sword was about. God, love, I use those words interchangeably. Love wants us to do it a different way. It wants us to open our eyes. Love wants us to open our eyes. And if thine eye be single, the whole world will be filled with light. Jesus said that. What does that mean? I think it's pretty clear. It's pretty clear to me what that means to me. You know, you get to interpret it any way you want to. These are thoughts that have been occurring to me. And I'm on fire about Jesus again because I felt so hurt by Jesus. And I never thought I'd go to an interfaith seminary to become a better Christian. But that's what's happening to me. That's what's happening to me, and I'm almost willing to claim it in public. So God wants us to open our eyes. Jesus dares us to do it a different way. But do I need Jesus? Do I need Jesus? Is Jesus the way? No, I think when Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the light, he meant seeing with one eye is the way and the truth and the light. If you do it like I did it, it'll be good. I don't think he meant I'm the only one who's doing it that way. But if you do it like I do it, you're going to find the kingdom of heaven. And I don't need Jesus any more than Buddhists need the Buddha. And Theravada Buddhists don't worship Buddha in any way. They're completely self-reliant. Mahayana Buddhists are more about, actually deifying the Buddhists to a certain degree because he was a bodhisattva who attained enlightenment but then came back to help everybody else. Okay? And you could say that's what Jesus did. He knew who he was, and he stuck around and let himself be killed, even though he knew. And if you believe the resurrection story, which I think could be true on many levels other than the physical, and might be true on the physical level, who knows? I don't know. We weren't there. It's kind of that same thing. He didn't say, I've learned the truth and I live in the kingdom of heaven now. I'm going to go take a nap. He said, I have found the kingdom of heaven, and oh, my friends, I want you to find it too. I want you to meet me. Rumi says there's a field, and I'm not going to say the word completely right, but beyond right and wrong, beyond doing it one way or doing it the other way, beyond good and bad, I will meet you there. And I think that's what Jesus was saying. I will meet you in Rumi's field. So I don't need Jesus, but if I'm looking for an example on a wisdom path, he's a pretty good one. And probably the one I'm most familiar with. So what I invite you to do this week is to just see, all of it, everything I said, take what you like and leave the rest. It seems true for me right now, where I am. See if it seems true for you. And the way I invite you to do that is as you go out today, look around at your neighbor and imagine what it would be if your neighbor weren't other than yourself. See what that would do to your mind. I have a feeling it's going to blow it and make you even more confused. And that's perfect, because that's what Jesus said. When you really keep seeking, you're going to be really confused and disturbed and troubled. Different translations say confused, disturbed, troubled, and astonished. And then from your astonishment, the glory, the kingdom of heaven. So, I'm taking Christianity back. You can if you want to.